Technical University of Sofia in Bulgaria, her MSc in Computer Science and Aerospace Engineering at the Free University of Berlin in Germany from 2005 to 2000. Her PhD in Computer Science at the University of Lugano in Switzerland. Her doctoral research at the University of Lugano in Switzerland. Also, Professor Anna began her career as an IT consultant with McKinsey Company in Berlin from 2004 to 2005. She then went on to contribute her expertise as a researcher at the University of Applied Sciences of South Switzerland in Lugano from 2010 to 2014. Since 2015, she has been a professor at the University of Bremen. Professor Anna's excellence in research and teaching has been recognized through several prestigious accolades. She received the Best Paper Award at the IEEE Global Humanitarian Technology Conference in 2021 and was honored with the Wellington Award for the Excellence in Teaching in 2019. Professor Anna's main research interests focus on self-organizing and autonomous sensor networks, opportunistic networks, and underground sensor networks, where she applies artificial intelligence techniques such as machine learning and thought intelligence to wireless communication protocols and applications. Without any further ado, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Anna Förster. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a very, very long introduction. Thank you very much. You listed all. I feel old now. Okay, so today I'm here. I don't see you very well. Let me see how many people are there. But yes, seems like a crowd. Okay, so welcome very warmly from me. I'm Anna Förster. I'm from the University of Bremen in Germany, which is in the very north of Germany. So right now we have deep winter outside. Even if no snow, it's only 0 degrees and it's really not good to get outside. And today I would like to talk to you about the Internet of Things and how to apply Internet of Things in agriculture. So first of all, I need to ask you a couple of questions. Please raise your hand very, very high and keep them there so that I have a chance to see something. So who knows actually what is the Internet of Things? Come on, raise your hands. I don't see a single one. Nobody. Okay, one. I see one. Okay, very nice. Okay. So we'll start then really low and I will try to explain to you what it is and how can it actually be used in agricultural scenarios. Okay, so let's start simply. So first of all, let's clarify what is actually the Internet of Things. So it's a kind of a combination of existing technologies. First of all, can you hear me well? Do you understand everything? Hello?
You are audible, Professor Anna. We can hear you.
Okay. Because I don't see any reaction and it's very hard to understand what's going on. So please interrupt me somehow if there is a problem, okay? So the Internet of Things is a combination of existing technologies. Things like wireless communications are very important. Self-organized networks so that the different sensors can self-organize into some sort of a network, exchange data and so on. Machine learning is also very, very important because we would like not only to gather sensory data, for example, from our agricultural field, but actually also to analyze this data or even to achieve a little bit more. We'll see more a little bit later. And then, of course, in order to implement the IoT, we need something like embedded systems. These are small computers where everything is embedded into a very small size. That's why they're called embedded systems. And how to program them and which operating systems are actually used for them, because the normal operating systems which we typically use, like Windows, Linux, Macs, and so on, they are absolutely not available. We don't have simply the resources to install these operating systems, and we don't do that. Cloud computing is also quite important for us because we would like to transfer the data from the sensors, from the embedded systems with the sensors, to some sort of a cloud service for later analysis. And of course, also security and privacy is an important issue because we need to make sure that the data is safely and securely landing on the cloud service, that we have some privacy, but we can also rely on the data. So the security here is not that much of trying to steal a password or something like that, but it's more, it is more of a problem of whether we can rely on the data and not that somebody is trying to inject, for example, false data into our system to, let's say, interfere with our agricultural activities. This whole thing, so the Internet of Things, is kind of organized in 4 steps which are in a continuous loop. What is really important to understand is that those steps are completely autonomous. So we're talking here about an autonomous system which works completely by itself without any actually human interaction being needed. Apart from deploying maybe the sensors somewhere in the field, we are actually out of the whole story as humans in the loop, let's say. This is quite different from what we know how we use, for example, a computer or a smartphone, where the human is actually triggering something in this system. So we trigger, for example, opening a weather app and checking the weather for today. We trigger the irrigation system by putting it on. So in an IoT device or in an IoT system, we are out of this loop and we let the devices do that completely autonomously and by themselves. And the 4 steps which we're talking about is, first of all, sense some data. This is very important because at the end, this is the heart of the IoT, the sensors. In our world, in our area, the agricultural area, those could be soil moisture, it could be temperature, it could be rain quantities, it could be the wind, and so on and so forth. You know, like everything which is relevant at the end to our agricultural activities, from very simple things like temperature and soil moisture to very sophisticated ones, for example, dissolved oxygen. Excuse me, can you please put on mute? Yeah, thank you. So to very complex sensors like phosphate or nitrates or pH values and so on and so forth. Okay, once we gather this data in this sense step, we have to exchange or connect in some way or deliver the data somewhere, because on those embedded systems, they're so small and restricted that you actually cannot really do a lot of data analysis. Okay, and so what we do is that we do a little bit of a data analysis on the spot in situ, and then we deliver maybe all of the data, or at least the results of our data analysis. We deliver them to some sort of a cloud service or to other nodes in the vicinity for further processing and further analysis what to do. Then we analyze this data and we act upon this data. So the simplest scenario will be something like sense the soil moisture in the field, then send it up to cloud service so that the user knows how it is going, analyze it automatically directly in the node, or so in situ on the field, and then activate some irrigation system or don't activate the irrigation system. Okay, then you can consider, of course, many more, much more sophisticated scenarios, but I think it's more important right now to understand actually the basics, and we will look a little bit into more complex things later on today. So how does this sensor network idea work? So for now, we have kind of realized that, okay, we have some sort of a small device which has some sensors on board. Let's say it has temperature and soil moisture. This is very simple and very well understood. And now I would like to have, let's say, a field like that. This is a typical field from northern Germany. It's already harvested everything away. But we would like to see, for example, how it is doing, let's say, over the winter. Okay, this is in Germany. It's also quite important to see how much water, for example, has been stored during the winter, so that in the next harvesting season, you know more what to do actually. So now the question is, okay, with one box only, so those are really small boxes, we will see them later. With one box only, it's a little bit hard. So this field, for example, is a little bit hilly. So if you put it really down in the hill, so let's say in the valley, you will probably have different measurements than if you put it on the top. And the same is true, of course, for different areas of this field, because some of them are really large and so on. So what we do instead of that is not to use only one box with one set of sensors, but we multiply these boxes and we put them everywhere where we consider the data to be interesting and unique. This is not my job as an engineer. This is actually the job of the farmers to tell me where they have an experience that it's important to observe. So once they tell me where to put them, I can put a note here, I can put a note there, I can put another one here, and there, and then I have also to put something which I call the base station, which can be also called a sink. Hello? Can you please put on mute?
Deepika madam.
Excuse me, can you please put on mute? So unless you have a question, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you're very welcome to interrupt me with some questions or so, but otherwise maybe try to keep muted because it's quite disturbing. Okay, so the base station is kind of a special thing. It does not have any sensors, okay? It is only there in order to get the data out of this field and through the internet to some sort of a cloud service. I call it a base station, but it can be also called a sink because all the data gets there like in a sink. And it can be also called simply a gateway, which you probably guys have already heard. We typically don't say access point because it's actually not really an access point. So it's a little bit different than normal Wi-Fi access point. And what is here also important is actually how to connect everything to these base stations. So some of those nodes will be wirelessly directly connected to the base station. So we will look into that a little bit later, but pretty much whenever I bury a sensor node in the ground or put it even on the ground, there is only some limited distance to which I can communicate. So if you buried it, for example, a normal distance will be like 20 meters maybe. If you put it on top of the ground, depends really on your application, you will maybe have something like 100, 150 meters, depending on how big the field is, maybe up to half a kilometer, but it's limited. So some of those nodes will be directly connected to the base station, so they can talk directly. However, some of them will not be. And the question is how to organize that. And this, I'm coming now back to what we said in the very first slide, where we said that autonomous networking is important. So in this case, it's important that the nodes realize by themselves that there is a problem here and that I cannot reach the base station directly. And what I do is the so-called multi-hop routing protocol. There exist several flavors and versions of that, where we hop the information from one node to another until it reaches the base station. The problem is here that those activities, finding out where to hop through, how to deliver to the base station, should be really conducted on the node itself and not somewhere outside or in a kind of a predefined way, but in a truly autonomous, autonomic way in the field without any human interaction. If something breaks, they have to be able to repair the links again. Okay, so now we have delivered all of the node, all of the data pretty much to the base station. Once it is on the base station, we can assume that the base station kind of tunnels everything to a cloud service, or maybe actually does the data analysis by itself. That is a matter really of decision, what is easier, what is available. Do I have an internet connection? Maybe not. Is it really necessary to get it outside for some very complex analysis? Or it's perfectly sufficient to do a little bit of analysis in the base station, things like which irrigation points to put on and which ones to put off. This is relatively simple. And each of these nodes can be like a box, like I have been mentioning before. This is the box. This is our MoleNet box, which is with sensors and everything equipped. And you see that it's in a kind of a tight box so that we can bury it in the ground and use it then for various measurements. So then I would like a little bit to talk to you about the system's architecture. So you have seen now pretty much the course picture. We have a node where I can connect different sensors, and I need a little bit to decide where to put it and how to organize this whole system so that I get the data out and I can actually find it useful or use the data in one way or another. So the system architecture, this is what we call a system architecture. So how exactly we organize the system, how many nodes, where to put them, below the ground or under the ground, what kind of wireless technology to use, how to place the base stations, where to place them, how many to place, and so on. And so one very typical way of doing it, like we have some sort of best practices of doing that, is actually to put the sensors underground. So the individual sensors, let's say the soil moisture sensor hanging on a long cable, we put it actually below the ground, but the communication is over ground. So you can imagine it in a way that you can see it a little bit here in the picture. I hope you can see something where you have a kind of a pole with, let's say, a solar panel on top of the pole with the communication technology, let's say wireless communication at that pole. And then the sensors are connected via cables directly to the ground and are actually in the ground themselves. This architecture is very simple to do because everything remains visible to the farmer and kind of very clear to see whether everything is working correctly, whether it's still there, like simple things like it has not been stolen and so on. And however, it is at the same time also slightly problematic because everybody sees those. The security is not very good. So all in terms of physical security, so stealing, but also in terms of that somebody can, for example, just destroy just cut the cable, for example, and then your application will not work at all actually anymore. So this is kind of a simple one where you can do it, for example, in very secure environments, let's say in agricultural research institutes, testing fields of universities. We are doing that here in Bremen, but also our partners everywhere else where we're cooperating with. You can do it also for highly secure fields, like, for example, some in Germany are very secured, some are not. So if you feel like, okay, security is actually not my problem, then this is probably the simplest first version you could do. Then the other possibility is to do pretty much exactly the same idea. So again, the sensors are underground, the communication is overground, but instead of having something like here where we have some base stations and everything is kind of fully organized and not very flexible, we actually say, okay, we put the sensors or these boxes with a solar panel on top, we put them wherever it fits, and then they self-organize. So instead of having base stations and some sort of a star topology, we can have also in-network multi-hop. This is what I explained to you beforehand, where the data hops from one node to the other in a completely autonomous way. More flexible, the problem of security is still there. And we need only one sink, for example, because now the data is able to hop through the nodes. And we would only need actually one single base station, maybe two, just to make sure that everything is reliable, but not that amount which we needed actually before. So it becomes cheaper, which is also quite interesting. And then there is a possibility, which is a kind of a more sophisticated, advanced version already, where the sensors are underground, but the communication is kind of mixed. So we have here is that the sensors are completely buried. So as we're doing it in our MoleNet platform, where you see it here also in the picture, that we bury the complete box. So everything is in that box. You see here very nicely the sensor with a very long cable. And in the box, we have batteries, we have the wireless transceiver, we have the microcontroller, everything is in the box. So once you bury it, there is nothing to be seen above, which has two implications. First of all is the security, but also the fact that you can continue with your normal agricultural activities on top of these boxes. So you don't have to go around them, and to make sure that you don't cut the cables and you don't destroy or somehow temper them. But instead of them, you can bury them. You can bury them relatively deep, and then you can work normally on top of them without taking care where they are at all. Then you would have also some sort of a one gateway in the field, but the sensor nodes can communicate actually directly with this gateway. So we need more gateways, okay? Because you remember probably that the deeper I bury the nodes, the less the distance I can reach in a wireless communication. So in our case, that would pretty much mean that the sensor nodes need to communicate directly to the gateway, and so we'll need many gateways in the field to actually get the data out, but the individual boxes are completely invisible in the ground. And then, of course, you can do it again in a multi-hop network. So exactly the same story. Now you bury everything as in this picture, but instead of having many different gateways, you again use some hopping around or a multi-hop in order to reach the single gateway or the very few gateways. Okay, this last thing is a very sophisticated version. And it is not simple to maintain and to deploy. So it's rarely seen actually in, let's say, well, in practice, like in test beds and what we're doing a lot, of course, but it's rarely seen in a real agricultural field. Okay. Now I would like to give you, like, I hope I have been able now pretty much to cover a little bit the technology. So what is the Internet of Things? How does a simple box can look like our mole nets? And how do you actually place it in the field, and what do you need to consider? The summary is pretty much that you need to be very careful about the wireless network or the technology, because that is together with the sensors, it's pretty much the most important part of the IoT system, because you would need not only to gather good quality data, but somehow to use it. And the use it on the node is rarely very useful or extremely useful. So you need to get it out, and for that you need a wireless technology, because everything else is simply not practical. Now I would like to jump into applications. Okay. So there are very many different applications which we can cover with IoT. For example, we have a lot of outdoor fields where we can do some overground monitoring. Let's say we take a vineyard, and there, of course, there is the possibility to, like, the wine is really overground growing, and we're interested there, for example, to measure the air humidity, the temperature, the wind, and so on. So that could be a very simple thing, and you need pretty much a variant of a weather station, maybe with some very special sensors, like, for example, especially for growing wine, there is even a sensor which is measuring the leaf wetness. So it looks like a leaf, and you know how much exactly other leaves will be wet or not. Very specialized thing. And then, of course, for overground, which is very important for smart farming, is you can do some pest and health control. So over the ground, you can observe a lot from the plant itself. And, for example, figure out that there is a sickness coming out slowly, and you can catch it very early compared to when you do it just whenever a person actually discovers the very first leaf. And then we have also underground monitoring applications. Here we have been discussing it. It could be soil moisture and temperature at different depths. Could be also the pH value. And this is pretty much what I have been talking to you already until now. So this is simply to make the difference that depending on what exactly you would like to measure, you're actually either overground or you're underground with your sensors, maybe also both, of course, that doesn't exclude each other. Then you can also use IoT in greenhouses. Like in outdoor fields, we have covered it, but also in greenhouses, it's also very useful to use them. And it's actually easier because you have typically good energy supply. And you have, of course, also, well, not of course, but much more often than outside and outdoors, you have also actually a wireless communication. So here you can even use something like Wi-Fi, which otherwise in the outdoor fields we don't use because the transmission radius is way too low. So here in greenhouses, you can use pretty much whatever you have there in the greenhouse, and that supports the deployment of an IoT system very much. So it can be looking like something like that, where you have different sensors spread over the complete greenhouse, and then you have much better knowledge and, of course, control of what to be done here. What is also interesting is that agriculture at the end is not limited to plants, right? I'm not an agriculturist myself, but this is something which I kind of didn't realize until a couple of years ago, that smart farming is not only about plants, but it's also about livestock. And you can do with IoT actually very sophisticated health monitoring of your livestock. And I will give you also some examples later on. So let's say, like I will give you more deep examples. One example could be very simple one, is to say some vital parameters of, let's say, cows, or you can do even behavior monitoring via, for example, a camera. So if, let's say, one of the cows is actually sick, but you don't really realize, it will most probably change its behavior. So it will stop eating, it will stop maybe drinking, and you can catch this behavior change, for example, with a camera without the need that the person is actually taking care. And of course, you can also control and localize the livestock so that you know exactly where they are, which in some areas where they are wildly grazing, it's actually a very practical thing. You can do it also to protect the livestock, which is actually the example which I will be talking about. But for example, you can protect the livestock from theft and vandalism, and you can protect them also from predators. Okay, we'll see a little bit more about that. In our case here in Germany or in Europe, this is mostly the wolf. We don't really have any other big predators here. In other areas, it's of course, like in Africa, for example, people are more concerned, of course, about lions. But here in Germany or in Europe in general, the wolves are coming back. What are the goals of IoT when we're talking about applications in agriculture? So first of all, very generally, we would like to increase actually the productivity and the sustainability of some smart farming. So on one side, you would like simply to increase the productivity, okay? You would like to invest less as money, time, land, water, resources in general, and you would like to produce simply more. But at the same time, the productivity increase, especially if you're talking about resources like water, herbicides, and pesticides, then you're actually also increasing the sustainability, which to me is a very important motivation to continue working in this area. You can very early recognize sicknesses and pests, which pretty much binds back to the very first goal by saying, okay, if I can very early recognize them, then I can also stop their spreading very quickly and with much less resources or, let's say, medicine than if I do it very much later. You can also use IoT actually to select the right crops. This is very important where, especially with climate change, because people have been used to grow the same type of crops over generations, and they don't really realize that with climate change, they have, for example, a chance for a much more productive crop, but they continue growing whatever they were used to. You can start introducing crops from areas where it was completely impossible before actually to grow them. But of course, also the other way around is true, that some of the crops will stop being very productive in some areas and you actually should exchange them with something else. This is also like IoT in agriculture is also very often called smart farming or precision farming. This is also what I have been using now as a keyword. So this is, to be honest, more or less the same. Okay, some people make some very tiny differences. At the end, it boils down to the same technology and to the same principles. So now I would like to give you some very specific application examples, which my group has been involved in, in developing and deploying them. One will be, again, the MolNet platform, just to let you understand why we actually developed this platform at the very first time. We will see how to use the same platform which was developed for soil monitoring in aquariums. We will see how exactly the same thing can be used for mosquito monitoring. And then we will look into the wolf protection fence, which we're still developing here in Northern Germany. So when we started looking into this area, because we have been working in IoT now for many, many years, like I'm working now for approximately 20 years now in that. And when I came here to Bremen, and we went actually pretty quickly with some African partners to Cameroon. And they were showing me a very interesting application where I decided pretty much that we need to help somehow. So they were doing reforestation monitoring. The idea is the following, that like in Sri Lanka, this is not really the problem, at least not in the areas which I have visited. Maybe there is a region which is affected by drought and by desertification. But in Africa, this is a huge problem. Like Sahara is expanding, and it's pretty much occupying previously productive agricultural fields. And the fact is, however, that doesn't happen spontaneously, and like you have some sort of a border between here is desert and here is a productive agricultural field. You have a kind of a stripe of land which could be just 20, 50 meters broad, which could be also several kilometers broad, where it's not desert, but it cannot be used for agricultural activities anymore. So it's very, very dry and nothing really grows there. You cannot really recognize it as a desert, but it's unused. It's useless. And so my colleagues there from Bremen and from Cameroon, they were trying to fight exactly those stripes where it was not desert and not an agricultural field. And they were doing it in a, I think, very smart way. They were filling old coffee bags, so those very big bags which they used to actually fill the coffee beans in. They were using those old ones to fill with good soil and seeds. And they were simply putting it around in this stripe of land. And the reason was that they knew there will be some rain coming down, but it will typically flush everything away, and it's not held back simply by the field. So by putting those bags, whenever the rain comes, it will fill actually with water, and because the bag is pulling it together, like it's holding it actually back and together everything, the water cannot escape really, and it will hold below the bag, and in the bag there will be a lot of water. And so this is exactly what you see here in this picture, but it's in a similar field, like it's a testbed field in Bremen actually, which was only mimicking the stripe in Africa. And their research question was how actually to place these bags. Okay, so you see here in the front, you see some half moons. Then you see some sort of small patches which are organized a little bit like checkmate. And then in the very back, if you see carefully, you see that there is a completely empty space. This is not left empty by purpose, but it simply shows that this checkmate pattern is not working very well. Because if one of them for some reason doesn't grow, it could be anything, then a very big area stays actually completely empty. And so obviously these half moons right now are working a little bit better, but the fact is you need to wait for at least a season to see what is growing. And what we did is actually to develop this platform, this sensor platform, which you can put below the bag. That's why it's actually an underground one. And you can immediately see how much soil moisture has been stored there after the very first rain. And so this was actually the initial motivation for developing this platform, which ended up really with this self-made hardware. Now you can see here internally what is in the box, like this picture on the left, you already know. And on the right is pretty much the PCB or the hardware, this embedded system, which we actually put into the bag. So it consists of several things, which I will not go into many details here, but pretty much what we have here is the transceiver with this very big antenna. We have a microcontroller with some memory to hold some of the information which is here being stored, and then connectors for sensors, because we can change the sensors depending on the application which we have on hand. So it's a self-developed sensor platform. For the ones of you who have been playing a little bit around with such embedded systems, it's Arduino-based. I will not go into details about that. It has a wireless communication over a very low frequency, so 434 megahertz is much lower than what we have, for example, for Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is 2.4 gigahertz or even 5 gigahertz. So this is now the difference of how far we can go. The lower the frequency, the further away we can go. And we use LoRa, long-range wireless technology. Again, I will not go into details, but if you're interested, you can check it out. There is tons of information online. And then you can connect any possible sensors which you're interested. It could be water content, temperature, humidity, pH value, dissolved oxygen, and so on. So looking a little bit more carefully here in what is inside, I'm actually not that much interested right now to explain you the individual hardware, but to tell you something a little bit about the price. The price is always a good question, but you should also not forget that the price, was there a question? No. That the price is depending also on how many you produce. So we are a university here. We don't produce big numbers. We're not a company to sell them. So we have to buy them, the individual parts, we buy them pretty much individually, or maybe 10, but not more than that. And so the total price without any sensors, you can see it here summarized, is approximately 50 euros. But this can be lowered significantly if, for example, you buy the complete system from a real producer and not somebody like we who are developing it for our own purposes. And what is really interesting here are to understand a little bit more this wireless communication thing. So we did some experiments in similar soil as in Africa. This is pure sand. And we have been putting it really deeply, so you can see it here. And then we cover it also with sand, so it's not open like here. And we have tried out with 2 different frequencies. So all we did is just change the frequency of the communication between the previously mentioned 434 megahertz and something which is a little bit better available on the market as transceivers, which is the 868. And so you can see now the differences here quite well, that, for example, at approximately 20 meters, the packet loss, so how many packets actually get through the wireless link, is increasing dramatically. So you can see it here very, very well that at approximately 19 meters, we start getting packet loss, and very quickly it grows to 100%, so we lose everything. If you do exactly the same for the lower frequency, for the 434 megahertz, that actually also happens, of course, but it happens much later. Instead of 20 meters, it happens at 80 meters, which is pretty good. This, however, you have to consider that it's a so-called underground to above ground experiment. So the sensor, this box here, is underground, but the receiver is above ground. So this is kind of the base station or the gateway. If you have this multi-hop thing, I don't have the data here right now, but it's lower than these 80 meters because both sensor nodes are actually buried. And you can see it here also in the received signal strength, but we can skip actually this one. A very interesting, just a second. A very interesting application, which we did also with exactly the same boxes, just with different sensors, was some aquarium monitoring in Namibia. So it was a cooperation with the University of Namibia in the San Mujoma campus on the coast of the ocean. And the application was actually quite interesting again. So I really love these applications from agriculture. People were trying to grow sweetwater fish in salty water. The reason is Namibia is very, very dry, but lies on the ocean. So they have very little sweet waters, but they have lots of salty water. But people considered eating sweetwater fish kind of better. It was more kind of a luxury. They prefer the sweetwater fish because for some reason they believed it's better. I don't know. And so the researchers here decided to try it out, and they figured actually out a way how to put the very tiny fish, not the eggs, but the tiny, very, very, very tiny fish, into sweet water, and then gradually increasing the saltiness of the water by very precisely monitoring and controlling the dissolved oxygen in the water and temperature of the water, and of course the saltiness, so that it doesn't jump back and forth, so that you can increase it gradually to normal saltiness of the salt water of the ocean. And then you can continue growing them actually in salt water, which I believe is pretty cool. And their problem was, however, that they couldn't control it very exactly, and their experiments went very often fail because they simply couldn't afford this very strict control of the parameters. So whenever somebody forgot to check, pretty much the complete fish will die because something is happening. And we decided to help them by using other sensors. Like before that, we didn't use, for example, dissolved oxygen, because in the soil, this is very hard actually to measure and very, very expensive. In water, it's much easier. And so you can see here actually again our platform from before. You can probably recognize it a little bit. Now it's connected to other sensors, which are dissolved oxygen and pH value, and temperature, of course, is very simple, and saltiness. And we can control it much more precisely on a pretty much few seconds basis. More than that, we could do it even more precisely, but it's simply not needed. Like that doesn't change that often. And so this is how it worked. Like these big aquariums, they were quite large, but not huge. This is the fish pond, and then you can see here the MolNet sensor node in the waterproof box, and here you can see all the sensors hanging in. To explain you here a little bit the setup. So why the MolNet, and why didn't we take, I don't know, something like simply Wi-Fi communication, because we're in a research center. The problem is that this whole environment, like you can see that it's part of a big lab. It's actually a huge hole with dozens of these fish ponds, and it's a very wet, humid, and splashy environment. So the big fish actually, they start also splashing and jumping out of this fish pond. So it is very, very humid environment in general, and humidity is exactly our enemy number one for wireless communications. That's why we thought, okay, if it works under the ground, where also the soil is our first enemy, it will work also better than Wi-Fi in an environment like that, even if we don't bury it anywhere. However, we cannot really put it in the water, the whole box. So first of all, it doesn't make a lot of sense right now, because why? I mean, it's kind of easier simply to put it there. Also, the water tightness is a little bit problematic if you really put it in the water, like you really dive it in. But it's simply not needed. But also because the wireless communication in pure water will simply not work. So maybe 10 centimeters below the level of the water level, it will be okay. Everything below that, it will completely stop working immediately. As I said, water is our main enemy. Pure water, of course, the most, but also things like very high air humidity, a lot of leaf humidity, so a lot of flora at the end. So for example, a rainforest like in Sri Lanka, it will be very difficult. or of course the stored water in the soil. Then we also did a very similar one talking about rainforests, about mosquito counting in Thailand. So again, we used exactly the same box pretty much, now to connect to a microphone and to try to recognize mosquitoes based on their wing beat sound, so the sound which they're doing. And our colleagues from the tropical medicine in Bangkok, they figured out that you can actually recognize the mosquitoes, not only that there is a mosquito, so pretty much count any kind of a mosquito, but in better conditions, like good audio conditions, you can actually even recognize which mosquito species that is, and to recognize whether it's the one which carries probably malaria or dengue fever, or it is one of these which don't carry anything. And apparently under really optimal conditions, they can even recognize whether that particular mosquito actually carries malaria or doesn't. So it sounds a little bit like a small cold, just to make it a little bit more clear. Like I'm not really sure what exactly they're looking at. Probably it's a kind of a frequency domain analysis, which they do. But at the end, what they need are audio recordings and a lot of machine learning in order to recognize whether it's a mosquito, how many mosquitoes, and maybe even to decide what kind of a species. We use now again LoRa for communication, because LoRa was this long-range wireless technology, which we used until now also, which has very large distances to communicate and doesn't need actually any kind of a pre-set up infrastructure, let's say kind of a mobile telecom or something like that. And for us, it was very practical again, because we deployed it in a village, as you can see here, in a rainforest in Thailand. It was actually the dry period, but it was still very, very wet, and all other wireless technologies simply failed immediately. We use machine learning to train the model for the recognizing of the mosquitoes, but that was actually not the contribution of my group. And you can see a similar setup here, where we needed actually to change a little bit the board which we were using, but you see pretty much the same components. So you see here this greenish PCB, you see again the big antenna, the LoRa one, you see a different battery this time. And of course, the connectors for the sensors had to be a little bit different, because now we don't have soil moisture, but we have audio or a microphone, which has a little bit different requirements to connect. But for an electrical engineer, this is kind of an afternoon job, so it's not a big deal. And then what we explored here is actually, we said, okay, the first time we are overground with these mosquito traps, and we are trying to see which wireless technology to use so that we can install as little gateways or these base stations as possible. And we looked a little bit into the reception ratio, the quality of the wireless communication over different distances. So what we did pretty much is to put somewhere this trap and then started walking away from it and continuously communicating with it to measure when it actually will stop working. And you can pretty much in each wireless communication link, you can identify some kind of regions. So what we have here actually on the y-axis is the so-called, again, reception of packets. So 0 means that none were lost, okay? Sorry, 0 means that it was not received at all. And 1 means that it has been received. So it's a binary decision, received or not received. There is nothing in between. These are the individual packets. So they're not summarized, these are individual packets. And so you can see here pretty much those 3 regions, where in the very first one, pretty much everything is received. So you see one outlier which was lost, happens here and there. It's okay, we can work with that, we know what to do with that. But it happens super rarely. So here probably, I don't know, less than several percent. Then there is a region which we call some sort of an intermediate region, where the connection is kind of working half of the time. So sometimes it gets through, you get some data through, but not all, definitely. So either you have to work a lot on the communication protocols to improve that and to resend the packets and so on, or you just say, okay, this is not practical anymore, we'll just leave it. And then after some particular distance, which is very different and very depending on the environment where you're testing, it simply stops working altogether. So you don't get a single packet through. Actually, it can happen that you get again kind of an outlier and one packet gets received because there was some sort of a reflection, but otherwise it simply stops working. And as I said, we did it kind of putting somewhere the mosquito trap and then walking away from it. In this case, it was simply our hotel where we put it first and then we started walking to the research center, but those are kind of details. What is important here is really the environment, that it is not these results, they cannot be easily transferred to another rainforest, let's say. First of all, you have a kind of a unique setup of the air humidity, of the wetness of the leaves in the trees, how thick the vegetation is, and of course it's also the hilly area. So in this case, we had some hills here exactly in between, and whenever we try to move further away behind these hills, it simply stopped working. So hills are not good for us. Okay, and last but not least, I would like to tell you a little bit about a kind of a more sophisticated application, which is definitely also a little bit more expensive, but it also is kind of a special, I would say, where we're trying to detect and repel wolves automatically here for Europe. So wolves have been becoming a major problem here lately because we didn't have any wolves for kind of 2 centuries. They were hunted down. And then we reintroduced them, or we simply allowed them to be reintroduced and to re-enter pretty much from Siberia and from Russia down. And they are hugely protected in Europe, so you cannot hunt them, you cannot kill them, it's absolutely prohibited. However, they started attacking our livestock, because for 2 centuries, people got used that the livestock, you can put them somewhere in the wild, and you put a tiny fence around them, like you can see it here in the picture, and just to prevent them pretty much from running away. And then you can leave them there for a couple of days while they're grazing. So nothing happens, everything is good. This is kind of these wild pastures, which we have here in whole Europe. It's very, very popular and very, very widely used. However, for a wolf, for a hungry wolf, such a fence with all of these sheep or cows inside, especially the sheep, it looks a little bit like all-you-can-eat buffet, right? Like you just come around, the sheep don't react to the wolf at all because they're not used anymore. They don't have a chance to learn about the wolf and what it does to them. And all it needs to do is pretty much pass this small fence because it's really plastic and very, very soft. They need a couple of hours to figure out that it's not dangerous to them in any way. And then they enter the fence, and the problem is that they get into a blood rush and they kill everything which they can. So they don't kill a single sheep and then eat it and go away, so that the others can actually learn and protect also themselves next time or start running away or whatever. But it kills really everything which it can see around. And this is, of course, a disaster for the livestock holders. And it's a big financial but also psychological problem. So many farmers stopped now doing this wild pasturing here in Europe because they're really scared that their herds can be killed overnight. That has happened really here also in Germany. And so our idea was a little bit to see, okay, last centuries the question was always wolves, no wolves. With wolves, you have to protect and live with, like maybe use shepherd dogs, maybe protect yourself, the livestock, whatever else, or you simply kill the wolves again. So we decided to see whether there is a kind of a more modern approach to that, where we see with our technology, with IoT, cameras, and especially artificial intelligence methods, whether we cannot detect the wolves automatically and try to repel them from the livestock. So what we do for that is that we develop the image processing system, which looks a little bit like that. So to explain you this picture, this is the camera which you see. It's a normal night vision camera, which you would otherwise buy to protect your home. So it has a pretty good night vision mode, but also during the day it has, of course, colors, and it has a pretty good precision, but it is not something extremely. So it's full HD, yes. It can cover also pretty large area, which is also good for us, but it's not something which is super expensive. So on the market, it's still actually in the lower level of the financial sector. You see that we have attached it here to a big fence, which is definitely not a fence, as I was talking to you before, see a light fence which the wolf can easily pass. Obviously not. The reason is that we gathered all of our testing and training images in wolf parks, because even if wolf is a big problem in Germany right now, we cannot simply go to the forest, install a camera and wait for the wolf to come. That will not happen. And so that's why, in order to gather a lot of different images from different wolves in different conditions and so on, we went to several wolf parks in Germany, which are kind of a zoo only for local animals. So we don't have elephants and things like that, but we have only our own European animals there. And they typically also have wolves. And so this is why this fence looks like that. So we gathered all of these images actually in these wolf parks. And this is how they look like. So this was one of our first images where you see two versions of the wolf. One is a white one, which is actually not very popular here in Europe. So you can very rarely see those. They're albinos. The other one, the gray one, is actually how they look like typically. What we also tried, but what didn't work very well, is to use infrared cameras, which on one side are very expensive. And on the other side, we have many false patterns here. So you can see here a picture which we took in the summer, in the night, where we said, okay, maybe we can recognize with a thermal one, of course, much better because it's a moving animal and not something in the background, which is just a forest. However, it turned out that during the summer, even if our summers are not that hot as yours, many things get heated up during the day. So here you actually see here a big water puddle, and here there are some stones around, and they get heated badly. You can see it's also here. They get really badly heated during the day. And whenever night comes, it takes a long time actually to cool them down. And the summer nights, especially in northern Germany, are actually very, very short. Like as a night, we have something like 5 hours at most. And in these days, like in these summer days, they don't cool out very fast, or they not sufficiently, so that at any point of time, we actually have it even more complex patterns here, which we cannot recognize that easily as actually these HD color or night vision images. So we got a lot of such data, mostly our own actually. We gathered several thousands of images. And the problem is always a little bit the realistic images and hidden wolves. So realistic means that we don't have, I call them poster-like image of a wolf, like what you would print on a poster and put on the wall. A wolf sitting nicely and posing for a picture, like in full size. Typically, you see rather something like this. Okay, this is already a great image here in the middle because they're really close to the camera. Typically, they're much further away and they're sneaking behind a tree or behind a bush, or only the tail is visible and things like that. So these are, of course, for the image processing component, very, very tough, but it works actually better than you would guess. So here, let's say, take maybe a little bit of time. I'm also not sure about the quality of the beamer which we have there. Can you see the wolf? Raise your hands if you can discover it. Do you see it? Or the beamer is really bad? Okay, somebody started waving at me. Okay, so here it is. No, sorry. Here it is. Here's the wolf. So it's relatively small and it's really well blended in the background. So it's very, very hard for a person actually to detect it, especially with a back beamer. But the image processing here, for example, worked pretty well. But this is a realistic picture. This is what we need to be able to handle. And this is, for example, during the night, where now the wolves are a little bit better visible. Here, the two ones. But you see that they're quite blurry. Because during the night, you see that everything else is pretty well illuminated. This is a night vision image. So it's really dark actually right now, but the camera has an LED which illuminates everything. And you can see the two wolves, but because the illumination takes a little bit time to actually catch an image, then the wolves have moved already in this time. So it's a kind of a blurry thing, which as a person, you clearly say, oh yes, there is an animal. But to be honest, whether it's a wolf or it's a dog or whatever else, it's very hard to see. The wolf repelling, for those of you who are interested also in that part, we use things like ultrasonic, sonic, light pulses, and so on. The idea is that you're not hurting it permanently. So we're not allowed to do that. But we can scare it away and we can hold it back until something else can be done. So for example, whenever we detect a wolf, we will send also a message to the livestock owner to say that, hey, a wolf is sneaking around your herd. They will probably arrive there, but it might take them a couple of hours to arrive. And in that time, we're kind of holding the wolf away from the livestock, because the wolves have a very nice property that they're very careful. They will never just look and jump over the fence and just get the sheep. They will very carefully explore the area. Even if they kind of know already about these fences, they will still explore it very carefully, very quietly. They will even take not even one night, but several nights before they actually attack. And so we're trying to hold them back and to give them kind of a sign that, look, it's nothing for you. Go hunt the wild animals in the forest. Go away from here. Here, it's not good for you. And so we developed some prototypes, which are, as you can see here, very prototypey, so very hardware nerdy. The reason is that we didn't need anything else. We gave them to our partners from the animal welfare faculty at the University of Gießen, which is also in Germany. And they were doing experiments actually with wolves, but also with the livestock itself, because it was important that also the livestock doesn't panic completely, that we can train them at least to not react to those, so that the livestock doesn't panic or maybe takes it as a kind of a precaution a little bit, but the wolf is really reacting and scared off, at least for some time. These repelling actions, they need to be kind of random. Okay, so if you use only light pulses and you activate them anytime a wolf is around, what will happen is that the wolves will get used to these light pulses, not only for this particular pasture, but also for everything around. So they have to be kind of a random and to be kind of surprising when exactly they come, what are their exact parameters, and so on, so that the wolf doesn't get used too fast to them. As I said, they need also to be safe for the livestock, or that you can at least train the livestock that they should not be scared completely. And here you can see some of the tests which our partners have been doing in Germany, in this case with some sheep to check whether they're scared or not. In this case, it was with light. They're preparing that for testing in the night. And what is also important is that these repellent actions, they should be working at distance. So you cannot afford that the wolf will be detected and repelled only when it already reached the fence. If they already reach the fence, the probability that if you scare it off, that it will simply jump into the wrong direction, like kind of a reaction, or it will fall on the fence and just land on the other side is too risky. So we have to be able from approximately 10 to 20 meters to actually repel the wolf. which is from a detection point of view works very well. Like 20 meters is pretty much exactly what we can do with the cameras, which is pretty good, even during the night. But the problem is that those repelling actions, they need a lot of power in order to be effective at 10 to 20 meters. So right now we have a little bit of technical problems here that we cannot get the power out of these repellents to be active really on these long distances. Okay, I think I have been talking for a long time, so it's time to summarize a little bit. So one of the challenges which we still have in IoT, so we have seen now several applications, and most of the time we have problems with battery lifetime and energy harvesting. So for underground sensing, it is kind of clear, because if you bury your nodes in the ground, you can only rely on a battery, because there's no energy harvesting from solar panel or something, because everything is in the ground. This is also true exactly as I explained for the livestock monitoring. So in livestock, like you're in a forest or maybe somewhere else, the solar panel might be working, might not be working very well. It depends also. Battery or power in general is still a big challenge in IoT and agriculture. Another kind of a more research-oriented problem we have is that it's very hard for us to test our ideas, our technical ideas, because simulation or test beds are largely missing. So here you can see a picture of what one of our students here at the University of Bremen did in order to test different soil moisture sensors to test their precision. What he needed to do is to build this box, buy some soil in the supermarket, test all of these on his backyard, or I think it was even his balcony. So it is not a very scientific way of doing it, to be honest, because it's not a controlled environment. The soil which he used, you see that it's a kind of a not real soil, but something else, which we also realized only later, because at the end we're engineers, and this student, he didn't know that there is a big difference between the different types of soil. He bought something at the supermarket for normal plants for the balcony, and that's what he ended up with. And then later the soil expert said, what the heck is this? So it's very hard for us at the end to systematically test everything. And what happens very often is that we test. We develop something in our lab, then we go to the real farm, to the real field, and it doesn't work at the same way which we expected it to work, because we simply didn't have the possibility to test it in a realistic setup. And there are many reasons for that. I will not go into details. You can think about it like it's very hard for the farmers to accommodate us, because that means pretty much that they have to give away part of their field for our testing. They don't really want that. Also those parts of the fields, even if they say, okay, there is a small part which I will not use this time, that's also not the real testing environment which we're expecting, because it's a kind of a crappy one, like one problematic patch of land. Another very big problem is the so-called sensor aging and environmental influences. So sensors age pretty quickly. So very often people are trapped into getting a very cheap sensor because they exist. Like even if you look into soil moisture sensors, like on this picture, for example, here, the range of the cost of those sensors which you see here ranges from 5 euros to 500 euros, one. And of course, everybody says, they do exactly the same. If you read their specification sheet, they do the same. And you buy the cheap one. But what happens is that after a couple of months, it actually starts delivering wrong data. And this is a big problem, because it doesn't stop working so that you know and you can exchange it, but it starts delivering more and more false data, and really false one. So this is also a big problem here. So I was talking already about the camera problems, how what we have, like these are two examples of how we would like the images to be. And speaking of environmental conditions, this is what we get. Do you have an idea what it could be? What is the problem here with this image? Okay, it's quite hard to communicate with you guys, but okay, I'll reveal it. It's rain. It's simply rain during the night. As I said, you need some exposition for the taking the images, and then a single drop of rain makes this whole line here. And of course, go find now the wolf. It could be behind those drops. Another problem is also this one, where we by chance aligned our camera during the night to another camera in the wolf park, and they were blinded. They were blinding each other. We couldn't figure it out, like we didn't see it, and it's actually the probability of aligning two cameras like that is almost like winning the lottery, and we won it. So we managed to align it without knowing that there is another one, and the complete night was wasted actually because we couldn't. You see that you cannot see anything here. You can see it also much more clearly, maybe not in the forest, but actually with a house. So for example, this is the same camera which we're testing just beforehand on a normal house. This is how it will look like in a normal condition. This is again what happens when it's raining. And this is also very nasty. It's actually a spider which decided to build its net over the night exactly on our camera. And this is what happens. So it's exactly the same picture, but you cannot see now anything anymore. And speaking of sensor aging, I can give you just an example here where we had one old sensor for humidity and one correct or accurate one or not old one. And you can see here, you can see here that the difference in the two ones, so the blue one is the correct one, the red one is the old humidity sensor. And, oops, sorry. Nah. Sorry for that. The difference here is quite large. So between these two lines, for example, you have a difference of 10%. And 10% soil moisture or humidity is actually the difference between a really good yield and completely spoiled harvest. Okay, so this problem is, for example, a very serious one. And we're working on developing machine learning models to recognize that, so that we can at least say that, okay, the sensor is actually starts delivering wrong data, and we need to do something about it before it spoils our harvest. And as you have seen already, this is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for being with me. I hope that was understandable and that you were able to see all of the pictures and to understand what I'm telling you, that the connection was good enough for that. And I'm very happy to take your questions, either now immediately, but also gladly also by email later.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Professor. Now we move on to the Q&A session. So if there are any questions, they are welcome right now.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, education in 2018 in Sri Lanka is very famous. So, this famous caterpillar came to our own base cultivations and destroyed it. They call it Sena, the meaning is army. So, very large number of caterpillars came and destroyed these corn mazes. And any broadcasting or fertilizers did not help. Any chemicals did not help. So you already mentioned the mosquitoes.
I'm sorry, but I almost cannot understand anything. I mean, the connection is really bad and it kind of interrupts the whole time. I didn't understand anything. And maybe speak also a little bit slower so that it has a better chance to get through.
So this caterpillar they came to our phone-based cultivations, and
Okay.
they destroyed them in 2018. So any crop dusting or fertilizers did not help, and we call this Sena. So Sena means the army, and do you have any suggestions for that? You already mentioned about the mosquitoes, and my second question is this agriculture on wheels like baler, cultivator, block, or tractors. So something, can you any automation or machine learning suggestions for these vehicles in the paddy fields? My third question.
Okay. Okay, let me try to rephrase to see whether I understood something. So you're talking about some caterpillars which are on some crops, probably, right?
Yes,
Okay, and you would like to recognize them, right?
yes.
I guess this can be easily done with some image processing because they're probably not very small. How big are they?
Yeah, very huge army, not single one. They came very fast and destroyed the crop.
Okay, but how big? How big are they?
Of this time centimeters, in centimeters.
Sorry, say that again. How big are they?
It's 10, 5 centimeters, so something.
Centimeters.
Yeah.
Okay, but then image processing should be actually doing it fine. Like you can probably monitor them pretty well with that. And directly recognize them. However, before trying to do that, which is pretty sophisticated, I would actually explore which environmental parameters may make it more risky that they will come out. So for example, I don't know what they like, but for example, liking more humidity or a particular temperature and so on, so that you first evaluate the risk of the caterpillars to come or to reproduce very quickly, and only then, for example, deploy some sort of an image processing technique to recognize them while they're still only few and you can actually do something against them.
My second question was this wheels on agriculture, the vehicles, like baler, tractors, cultivators. So can we use automate machine learning for this scenario?
Whether we can automate that? Well, this is the whole idea of IoT, that you automate it, like you're not doing it by hand.
So we can
But
use
you're very welcome. Like that sounds actually a very interesting topic. If you want, maybe you can send me an email explaining a little bit better, because right now I find it really hard to understand what you're saying. Sorry for that, but the connection is really not very good. I hope you can hear me better than I do.
yes. Anyway, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Professor Anna Förster.
Okay, now I can hear you actually very well. So it's probably another microphone.
මොකද්ද මේ වෙබ් අයිඩි
Ah, okay, it's another, it's somebody for online. Okay, okay. Hello.
ඔව් ඒක තියෙනවා ඒක තුනේ නම්
Go
තියෙනවා
ahead.
මම
I can understand you. Yeah. Naveen, it worked actually pretty well. I could understand you very well, but just go ahead and ask.
So that's all I can understand for this informative session. So my question is, I'm making a variable similar to the geometric system. So I'm still debating whether to use an algorithm is mine to detect echolocation sound or bats or recognize them by using image processing. What is your idea?
I'm sorry, but I cannot understand anything. Can you maybe, instead of using this hand microphone, go to the laptop? Because I have the impression that the microphone there was much better.
Okay. So, okay.
Exactly. I'm ready.
So first of all, I would like to thank you for this informative session. So my question is, I'm making a battery propeller similar to your wool propelling system. So I'm still debating whether to use an ultrasonic mic or to detect echolocation sounds of bats, or use image processing for recognize them. What is your idea for that matter?
Mm. So ultrasonic or night vision. Thank you very much. First of all, that was well audible for me. Thank you. Well, I would need to know a little bit more about the application. There are probably pros and cons for both versions, also in terms of cost and how long they will be working well in the wild and things like that. Also power management and things like that. So it's very hard to say immediately what is better. Both sound like a very good idea. And you actually might even want to consider using both. Because typically, like, I don't know the application, and you're very welcome also to send me an email, and then we can discuss a little bit more in detail. But what I have seen very often is that you have two different sensors which you could use, and they have their pros and cons, not only in terms of power, cost, and so on, but in terms of when they work well. And then having only one, I would be surprised that it's working much better than the other. Typically, if you combine both, then you can actually catch much more information. So I would simply advise at this point to make a list of pros and cons and to evaluate their precision, and then you know more.
Well, thank you everyone for this valuable questions. Your questions are a very valuable session. We have come to the end of this. So I would like to invite Dr. Deepika Priyadarshini, Head of Quality Assurance, Senior Lecturer, and the Head of Department of Biosystems.
I'll take over application. So on behalf of Office of Research and Innovation Services of Postgraduate Studies and Research of Sri Lanka Technology Campus, I would like to express my heartiest gratitude to our speaker for the day, Professor Anna Förster from University of Bremen. And thank you, Madam, for enlightening us on this broad and interesting topic on smart agriculture. And I hope all our participants today, our students and staff members has gained a lot from this session. And thank you very much once again. And also I would like to thank for initiating this timely session to benefit all our students and the staff members. And also I would like to thank all our participants joining today. So I hope you all will something out of this, and thank you very much for joining the session. So until We meet again in another session. I would like to wish you,
Sana is our head of Office of Research and Innovation Services. So Ms. Varamika. So Nimka, thank you very much for your time. And we look forward to working with you in future. Some of good research works are there. So we keep in touch. Thank you, Rosanna.
You're very welcome. Let's keep in touch. Let me know if I can help somewhere. Send me emails to discuss interesting topics and projects. You're very welcome. Thank you for being with me.
Yeah, thank you. So if you meet Dr. Ingrid, please give us our regards to her as well. So we made Dr. Sana first from through our sample project. She came here to Sri Lanka Technology Campus as a mobility to give some insightful sessions under the sample project. That is the first time we made Dr. Sana. So we continue working with Dr. Sana. So we hope that in this sector we have a great colleagues from Bremen and they can continue working with Dr. Sana. Thank you, Dr. Sana, for your work.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. See you one day soon.
See you next time, hopefully. Bye-bye.
Bye.